everybody in right now. Okay, 60 seconds. All right. Good afternoon or morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the annual GLAM career panels. Today is our first career panel that we are having. We will be talking about careers in government and related industries for librarians, and I really appreciate you all for coming. I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Ms. Donna Sokol. She is the Program Management Specialist for the Internship and Fellowship Programs in the Library of Congress. Then we have Mr. Greg Diaz, who is the District Chief of the Chicago Public Library, District 4. Then we have Mr. Michael Collins. He is the Analytics Manager in the Federal Student Aid Department of the Department of Education. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Rosalind Allman, who is the Reference and Outreach Librarian in the National Transportation Library. And so I will get started by asking you all to share just a little bit about how you came across your field, your current position, what brought you into this career path to begin with. We want to start with Rosalind is unmuted, I think.
Yeah, sure. Well, how I became a librarian, I was a little bit in the family business. My dad's actually a librarian, and I worked in a library my senior year in high school, a college library, and all through college. And after a year out of college, I decided to go back and get my master's degree. And I assumed all the time that it would be academic libraries because that's where all my experience was. But I went to the University of Maryland. I was here in the Washington, D.C. area, and the jobs that I was finding to apply for were not in academic libraries. So I ended up getting more and more experience in government libraries and law libraries and so on. And then I got a job as a contractor at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And that'll be 20 years next month that I've been there in one way or another. 2 years this week as a federal employee.
Wow, awesome. That's awesome. Who would like to share next?
I can go.
Go ahead.
So I, very similar to Rosalind, got my start early. I was 12 when I got my first library position, worked through middle school in libraries, high school, college, and then obviously beyond. I got my Master's of Science in Information from University of Michigan, and then came straight to DC. I worked in the tech field for a few years and then landed at the Library of Congress. In June, it will be 20 years that I've been with the library continuously. Previously, I had come to the library as a junior fellow in, we'll say, the late 20th century, and then just couldn't stay away. So, and I've been in my particular position for almost 3 years now.
Right.
Greg. I can go next. So I'm Greg Diaz with the Chicago Public Library. I started out as a page in college, shelving books, and I was a terrible page. I was very bad at shelving books, putting books on the shelf, but I was really good at helping people with reference questions. And so I had some lovely manager mentors who mentioned that, librarianship might be something that I would be interested in because of, I like to read and I like to research things. And I promptly didn't listen to that and decided I was going to be a teacher. And then, a big financial collapse happened. Grad school, looked really interesting to me. I, thought it might help me become a teacher. And, I took a second look at librarianship and I've taken sort of a winding path, but I've, been everything in the Chicago Public Library, from a page putting books on the shelf to, a person helping people out on computers, to a children's librarian, a branch manager, and now a district chief over 16 locations.
Awesome.
So I'm the token non-librarian on the panel. I'm actually a mathematician and statistician by training, but I'm really deeply involved in knowledge management around data. And so part of the message I want to get out is that we need folks with experience in knowledge management and being able to find answers to things as we become a more sort of data-driven government. So I was hired as a statistical analyst at Federal Student Aid on a team that, among other things, we operate a data warehouse, an enterprise data warehouse, and we receive data from across the entire student aid lifecycle. So those of you who've received federal student aid, you've gone through the process of applying for your FSA ID. We have a system that manages that. We receive data from that. You've filled out a FAFSA. We have a system that manages that. We receive data from that. You've gone to your financial aid office and received a loan origination or a grant disbursement. We have a system that oversees that. We receive data from that. If you have taken out a loan and you go into repayment on that, you're going to start getting a lot of communications from a loan servicer, and we have a system that keeps track of all that, and we get that data as well. And what I discovered when I started was that there was a lot of institutional knowledge, both about changes that have occurred in policy over time, as well as how those changes in policy have impacted the data that I work with to do my job as a statistical analyst. And that was mostly locked up in the brains of 3 or 4 people who I work with, who I'm privileged to work with, who are brilliant, but it wasn't written down anywhere. And then as I started sort of moving up in seniority and being asked to help new hires come in, I realized that all the things that I had wanted when I was a new hire were things that I wanted for my new hires. So I sort of took a detour. I now spend about 20 to 30% of my time working on knowledge management. And so I keep telling my boss I want to hire a librarian full time, and he keeps telling me no because he wants to hire more statisticians. But there's a really wealth of opportunity out there for folks who are trained in knowledge management to work in environments like this.
Awesome. That's amazing. And so also, I don't know that I actually introduced myself when I started. So my name is Kelly Carroll. I am the Career Services Manager at the University of South Carolina in the College of Information and Communications. So I work with all of our information science students, our library science students, as well as our mass communications and journalism students. And that's how I became a part of this panel, this group. Okay, so now we're going to seg a little bit into some prepared questions that we have. I am going to try to leave a couple minutes at the end for you all to ask questions of our panelists. We may be able to get 1 or 2 in, but hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your nagging questions, the questions that are in the back of your head with the questions we have prepared. So to start, since you guys started telling me a little bit how you got into your field, what surprised you the most about working in your field or at your current organization?
I'd say part of it was that you have your choices, and your career will be determined a lot more by supply and demand than you imagine when you are getting into the field. There may be fields that you've never given any thought to at all that you end up in because, in my case, transportation, federal library, because that's what's there. And then you sort of get experience in that area. And then that sort of one thing sort of leads to another. And a lot of the jobs that I got were jobs that I got while I was trying to avoid getting more law firm jobs because they were not what you call life affirming generally.
I think what really surprised me is how circuitous the paths can be and how much flexibility is welcome in the field. Librarianship is an extremely popular second career, right? There are a lot of people who are bringing in different skill sets from, previous careers that you can sort of bend and flex into what you want your job to be. But also sometimes, it's a lot about taking opportunities that come your way. I'm an archivist by training, right? And my goal when I left university was that I would be, working in an archive, curating rare books, doing digitization projects. And I didn't expect that a few years after I graduated, right? I'd be a children's librarian. It would be focusing on community engagement for Hispanic populations. But I had relevant experience, and the work was good, honest, really impactful work. And so that was very helpful for me in building up a really robust skill set that would enable me to become a manager in the future.
One of the things that surprised me, I guess, about coming specifically to the library as a professional after my master's degree is how specialized each position is. So we're a larger library than some, and I had been used to being in organizations where I had to wear many hats. I was a generalist, right? I had to be in many different departments helping out wherever I could. But when I came to the library, the position is so specialized that you go deep with the skills that you learn, that you pick up, and that you cultivate. And so when folks are thinking about where they want to land after graduating, they should really think about where they're comfortable. Do you want to be in a small organization, almost like a startup situation where you're going to be helping out all over, or do you really want to hone that specialization? So there are advantages and disadvantages of both, right?
Absolutely.
I think the thing that surprised me most, and I'm gonna go take a moment to reiterate what Rosalind said, right? From my standpoint as a statistician, right? So before I became a statistician, I was a professional flight and critical care paramedic for 20 years. I figured I would land working in biostatistics and healthcare statistics. And when I got out of graduate school, I got job offers from the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Department of Education. That's sort of how I landed where I am. And I love the work I do now, and it's really fascinating. But if you had told me 10 years ago that I would have ended up being a social science researcher, I would have told you were insane. But I think one of the biggest surprises to me coming to government is you look at the government, you think the government's really well organized, right? It's kind of this big organization. There's a lot going on. I've done, I write code for a living, right? And oh yeah, they must be super well organized. They have to have really mature practices in place. I think that that's probably true in some places in government. It may even be true in some places in my organization. It doesn't happen to be true where I am in my organization. So you should not have a lot of preconceived notions about what a particular organization is going to be like, because I think there's a lot of differences in differing organizations. And Rosalind works at the National Transportation Library, and I saw a talk by one of her colleagues at a conference, and they are so far ahead of us in terms of what I'm trying to do that I'm like, please give me advice. And so they're really mature over there at the Department of Transportation. Here at FSA, we're not as mature, and so there's a lot of differences within different places.
Excellent. That's all really good. Actually, so you guys set it up perfectly for me to go to the next question that I have. You've talked a little bit, Donna mentioned a little bit about advantages and disadvantages. So speaking of that, what do you guys find are some of the advantages versus disadvantages? And Michael, you also alluded to this, of working for the federal government versus working for a private and or state employer in the government industries or in the library careers, information science careers?
Well, I'd say, of course, one of the biggest things is the security. It's a lot harder to lose your job as a federal employee. I spent many years as a contractor or consultant where when your contract was up, you could just lose your job through no fault of your own. It just disappeared. It wasn't there anymore. Even if you were doing a good job and people wanted to keep you around, didn't matter. And, I got laid off from a law firm once because the firm was having financial trouble. I didn't know it at the time, but the whole firm went under a couple of years later. So it was just a symptom. There are so many things like that. And, jobs can change if they don't have a need in federal government, even if they don't have a need for that function anymore. Your job can change. You can, get opportunities to move elsewhere, that kind of thing. But just being able to not worry about losing your job every 4 years for no good reason And the other thing is probably the hours. You know, a lot of people will work like 6:30 to 3, 8 to 4:30, 9 to 5. But it's not like a lot of like some libraries where you're going to have to fill in evening and weekend hours and things like that in most cases. So I that's one thing I really like about it.
Rosalind took, yeah, my answer. That's exactly the stability of knowing that you're going to continue to have a job, no matter if the administration changes, no matter if there's an economic downturn. Now there are lean years, obviously, with government as well. So there is that where really, there are hiring freezes and that kind of thing. But your position, as long as it continues to be funded, your agency continues to be funded, is secure. Another benefit or another advantage of being a federal employee are the benefits that that you do get as part of the package. I don't take it for granted that healthcare is there, dental care, vision care, life insurance, that kind of thing. All that we do pay a portion of as a government employee, but at least the options are there. And so I'd say benefits is probably one of the other advantages.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. Not just necessarily like the sort of traditional fringe benefits, insurance, and things like that, but I think I've worked some jobs in private industry, and the panel, we had a discussion a few days earlier this week, sort of prepping for this. And I think, Greg, I was actually surprised by how much leave new hires at CPL get. But even as a federal employee, right, the work-life balance is really good. So as a new hire, you're going to get 13 days of annual leave to start with. And after 3 years, that becomes 20. And that's in addition to getting 11 federal holidays. So you get a lot of time off. The scheduling flexibility is usually quite good as a federal employee, unless your job specifically requires you to have certain hours. Another thing that I think is really good is that the retirement is well defined, and so you have if you want to work until you're 70, you can do that. If you want to retire at 55, you can do that too, right? And things are flexible enough to allow that. So a lot of people say, oh, the federal government, the pay is not that great. Actually, the pay isn't horrible. And the benefits are very good. The work-life balance is really outstanding. And I think that it's terrific. I know Greg has, a similar but somewhat different opinion as a non-federal government employee.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, so, I'm the municipal guy here, right? So this is public librarianship, right? There is a lot of, there's working, 6 o'clock days, sometimes later days to work with the community. And there's ups and downs to that. But, large municipalities often offer really robust, healthcare packages, right? Really robust benefit time usage. We're essentially more or less on par what Michael was saying in terms of offerings and benefit time. I think one thing to really keep in mind is just that these types of jobs can be very much in demand, and people tend to stay in them for a while. And that's something to really plan around if you're trying to get into a public library, or I would imagine also a federal library. I'll defer to my colleagues here on that, but these are jobs that oftentimes you'll get in them, and then somebody will be in this job for 5 years, 7 years, sometimes an entire career. There are people in CPL who have worked for us for 45 years, right?
Wow.
And that's because our compensation is really good. The hours, even though it's public facing, are really reasonable. There's not a lot of overtime that's being worked or anything like that, right? And so it's something to consider because there are so many people who enter the job, right? You really have to look for those inflection points when hiring is happening, and there's potential for movement. So just keep that in mind, as you're making your choices.
Excellent. This is all really good information, really good insights. So with all of that being said, there is a question in the chat that I wanted to come back to. Miss Dianali Flores Rodriguez asked if you panelists find government careers life affirming, as Miss Alleman mentioned earlier.
I would say in a lot of ways I do, because I feel like I'm providing a useful service. You know, we provide a reference service to the public, answering questions about pretty much anything to do with transportation. And so, you know, there's not as much volume of that as there was 20 years ago, because people are better, you know, agencies are better at putting stuff on their websites, and people are better at finding stuff on websites. So we don't have to do as much, you know, one-on-one assistance. But yeah, I feel like it's a useful job, and I feel like it's valued. And at least for transportation, it's slightly less politically vulnerable than some agencies. You know what I'm saying? We're less likely to get cut for political reasons. Let's put it that way.
Understood.
I can speak to the question. I find my particular position very life affirming. I have a mission, just a personal mission, and in which I bring people together to celebrate their love for the written word. And it kind of guides all that I do. And in particular here at the library, I get new librarians their start at the library. Through the program that I run, and then also through the other internship programs that I help with. We just, you know, we love the new energy that comes in. We love seeing them, if they do leave the library, they go out and do really good things. If they choose to stay at the library for, you know, in a permanent capacity, they also do good things. And it's just, it's really, really exciting. And I'm sort of in a full circle moment as well, because I'm about to help manage the internship program that brought me to the library. So definitely life affirming.
That's amazing.
So I get to answer this very much in the affirmative, right? So I work at an organization that helps 8 million Americans go to college every year. So we have a terrific mission. I think that, you know, I mentioned that one of the job offers I got when I got out of graduate school was to work for the Marine Corps. Like, that's a very different job, right? You know, validating weapons systems, right? So, you know, this is a really great job. And some of the projects that I've been directly and indirectly involved with through my team have been really absolutely amazing. Like, you know, from an analytics standpoint, if I told you about some of the stuff that we've done, but you know, you are a lot more less likely to get selected for income verification now than you used to be, because of some projects that we've done to sort of improve targeting of that. And we estimate that about 60,000 students don't drop out of college every year because of that project. So we get to kind of go home every day and say, hey, you know, we're making a difference in people's lives. And, you know, that's something to think about when you go into, you know, federal government service or state, you know, where you have a lot of different places, right? You can work in law enforcement, right? Whether that's, you know, working at the Department of Justice, you know, in a prosecutor's office, or, you know, for, you know, a law enforcement agency. You can work for a social services agency. You can work for a tax agency, right? There's a lot of different things you do. And if that's something that's really important to you about what you work on, you should take that into consideration when you're doing your job search. The flip side of it is, like Rosalind said, like, you may just sort of end up, you know, you may not be able to be real selective if the options that are available that fit into your lifestyle decisions are limited. So think about that, but also be prepared to sort of decide what's really important to you.
Yeah, I do want to kind of underscore what Michael says, because I think kind of figuring out what is going to work for you and what's sort of a priority for you is going to be extremely important. I have people in my organization who work with the public every single day, right? And are visiting schools and doing story times and visiting laundromats, right? I have people in my organization who never see a public-facing patron, right, ever. And they do cataloging, or they are admin level planning, you know, events across the city, right? And figuring out like what is going to be affirming for you, I think, is really key in finding a job and finding value in work and value in this type of work.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing that. So we have another question that popped in the chat that actually aligns with one of our prepared questions. So the question that came into the chat was, are any of your organizations unionized? And then our prepared question was, what are the benefits of joining a union if you are unionized versus not joining the union? So if you guys wouldn't mind talking to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think all of us are unionized, right? Like I think everyone on this call is part of a union. I am no longer part of a union because I'm management, right? But I was a part of a union for 17 years. I highly recommend it if that is an option available to you. Part of the action of union is why our compensation plans are so robust, and why our benefit time, that you can take is so robust. It's kind of like a rising tide that lifts everybody. And even in my role as management, right, I don't look at my union colleagues as oppositional figures. We're working together to try to make something better in our organization.
Yes, we do. Federal employees have access to who fit in the right categories have access to the federal the union for federal employees. I'm not personally a member, but we do have someone in our library staff who is a member.
Yeah,
we do have union reps who come to like all hands meetings and things like that and ask questions and give reports, just in general on things what they're working on. So that's useful.
And I'm at the Department of Education. I'm a member of the AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees, which is our union. You don't have to join. Membership is optional. I joined and I pay dues. But even if you don't join, the union still represents you, right? So you're still part of the bargaining unit. That's not optional. And so if you don't know much about labor law, you would be sort of well served to educate yourself a little bit about that. And then, obviously, as a federal employee, like the way the union, like we don't go on strike, the union doesn't negotiate wages on our behalf, right? We have, a standardized wage scale that the federal government uses. But the union still does a lot of important things. They negotiate our working conditions on our behalf. They help us with things like when telework policies might be very restrictive. The union's been very helpful in negotiating those sorts of things. And so one thing I do is I would encourage you, if you are represented by a union, to join, because if you don't join, then you're being represented by people that you didn't elect, right? You don't get to vote for the folks who are representing you, the shop stewards, any of that, if you're not a member. So I think that's sort of the most important thing. And it's also the official position of the federal government that a strong unionized labor force is good for the American economy. So I would state that as well. And I've traditionally come from an area like, I worked in emergency medical services where some agencies are unionized and some are not. I think most federal government employees are represented by a union and are eligible to join.
I'll just say real quick that Rosalind and Michael covered exactly that our situation here at the library. We have 3 unions that cover the employees here, and same as Michael mentioned, the benefits of joining one or being represented by one.
There was a follow-up question in the chat that I wanted to bring up just in case people didn't see it. And this was more so for Greg. Is there a reason why managers cannot be in the union, or is there a separate management union? I know you responded in the chat, but just for the general population to hear.
Sure. And I don't want to get too granular here because this is actually going to vary very widely by your employer, right? In public service, oftentimes unions are, either by job classification that sort of group together under larger umbrellas. So for the city of Chicago, one of our big unions that we work with is AFSCME, right? And so it's really going to depend by your employer. In some cases, managers might have their own separate union. Not to use myself as an example, but here in the Chicago police, right, our police department actually has 4 unions. Each of which represents a different tier of people, right? At CPL, we have our AFSCME union for our members, and that covers everybody up until branch managers. But there are, it will depend very highly on, where you're at and who you're applying to. So do be aware of that. That's a really great question to ask when you're applying to a job. Like, what is your union situation like? What titles does it cover?
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so we have a lot more questions that are coming into the chat. We will get to your questions, I promise. I'm going to have our panelists answer a few more of our prepared questions that may answer some of these, and then we'll get to the questions that are popping up in the chat. And so the next question that I have for you all is, what are some skill sets that you believe would benefit employees and or future employees, so our students, when they're coming into these different careers?
Well, I can say my personal experience, it was, I'd worked in a variety of different kinds of libraries. I had a lot of experience. By the time I got this job, I had some experience with working in government statistical agencies. My current library is under the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and I had worked at the Census Bureau library already. But customer service, being familiar maybe with a particular industry, that kind of thing. It really depends a lot on the job. I mean, a lot of people come into a job, with the education that they got, thinking that they knew what field they wanted to be in, right? Like I did. And then as you get experience, maybe it's in that area, and maybe it's in what you could get at the time that you were looking for a job. And then sort of you build that up over time. So, customer service and knowledge management are the things that I found that are useful both in the library world and outside. Because I spent 8.5 years as a management consultant between gigs at the National Transportation Library all year at the Department of Transportation. So that's why I was hired for that other job, was because of my customer service experience mostly.
I have found that project management skills are a big in-demand skill. So whether you go through the official route to get your PMP, or if you just implement project management skills in your day-to-day work, that is looked upon very favorably. The other one is keeping on top of software skills. So there are going to be some baseline software, right, that you will need to know, obviously, sort of, the MS Office stuff, or the Google Suite, whichever one that particular organization uses. But then I always ask folks, when I talk to my my residents and my interns, I tell them to find a piece of software that makes sense within your field, but that nobody else knows. Okay, and what that does is that makes you specialized. It makes you the person who knows how to use InDesign, or you're the person who knows how to use Tableau, right? And they start going to you, and then you start developing a reputation for that skill, and then you can take it pretty far. Another one is collaboration. All of those group projects that you hated to do, welcome to the real world. All the rest of your time in professional life is group projects. So get really good at communicating. Project management also feeds into that, but also working styles too.
Yeah, I mean, Donna is so right that project management is super important, and I think I'm going to steal part of Michael's answer. Because one thing that I work on a lot in my job is process validation, and like figuring out the nuts and bolts of what happens next, right? And that's becoming increasingly important in information-driven careers, even in my sort of career where it is very patron-focused. Still understanding what the process is and how to make it work is very important. Also, if you have any social background, social work background, a background that is helpful for community engagement is just so important. Knowing who your people are and knowing how to talk to them will always make you a more successful librarian and more successful library. And that's a real growth field if you're trying to align where your career can go. That's a place I would definitely aim at.
And one thing I'll say, I think my colleagues in the federal space will probably agree with this. And Greg, I don't know what your situation is at CPL, but in government, it's not at all uncommon to use the services of contractors, right? Folks who are not necessarily employees of your agency. And so where that comes back to what Donna was saying about project management is a lot of it is you may be asked to oversee the work of contractors. And that may be a real gear shift for you from being in school where you have to do every little detail by yourself, right? Like you're doing the work. And now you sort of have to kind of zoom out for a little bit and not be necessarily super worried about all the little details unless that particular project requires that, but to sort of be able to manage the amount of time you do, because the whole point of having the contractor do it is so that it doesn't take all of your time. So being able to essentially delegate your work and understand and evaluate other people and understand what you can reliably delegate to someone and what you have to keep yourself or you have to give to someone else. And that's something that you probably aren't really great at coming out of school. So that's something that you have to learn on the job, but really take a moment to step back and think about that. Another thing that Donna mentioned is about sort of becoming expert with something that no one else is expert in. It doesn't even have to be something that is obscure. If you can do things with Excel that your colleagues are not capable of doing. So I really encourage my new hires to cultivate superior Excel skills. If the word Power Query makes you go, go out and learn Power Query. There's great videos on YouTube. Okay. If you really want to get into it, doing some macro programming, because people will ask you how to do things, and there's things that you can do with Excel because people already have that. Whereas if you tell them, well, if you load up Python and you can do this and the other thing, and I do a lot of coding in Python, but most of my colleagues don't have it. So learn how to do the extraordinary with the ordinary.
Yes, and also that's how I learned to do pivot tables, and it's been super useful. But also in my last job before I came to Department of Transportation, I was known as the person who can cut a really large sheet cake in a really short period of time. So that got to be my job whenever there was cake, get Rosalind to cut it.
So
and also I just wanted to add, in the last company I worked for before I took this job, one of the things that they would evaluate us on every year is, are you great to work with? And I've never worked for a company before that actually verbalized what that thing and what it meant. You know, is this somebody that you want to work with? Is this somebody that you enjoy working with, that's good to work with, that is helpful, that you just generally like to be around? Not are they competent, but are they great to work with? And I think that transfers to any job.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. There was a question that kind of aligns with what we were just speaking about the skills. Molly Bush asked, for students with limited work experience in library and or information environments, but if they have the relevant and useful skills, such as what you all just talked about, will they be overlooked in the application process, or how can they make themselves stand out?
Okay. I have to hop on this one because Molly, I am specifically looking for you, right? Like I am specifically looking for people who have relevant and useful skills that they can really sell during their interview. So in public librarianship, right, I might have a librarian who is extremely good at doing a children's program, right? I might have another librarian who is an amazing musician and bakes a lot of the body of their work about teaching people music and bringing music education to their community. I might have another librarian who is amazing with technology and basically, works on our 3D printers across the system. These are all real people I'm talking about. Having some sort of secondary skill in the public librarianship end of things is extremely valuable. And it's something you should really lean into and talk about how you can bring it into the work that you're doing. There's a lot of ability to bring your passions and your skills into public librarianship if you're engaging with patrons or if you have a skill that's useful behind the scenes. So I don't think that you would be overlooked if you can talk about your skills in ways that will, add a benefit to the organization you're thinking of joining.
There are also things like anything to do with data visualization, like Tableau, that's really hot right now. And a lot of organizations have a use for those kind of skills.
Yeah, I'll echo that, and I will probably go to my grave saying, you can do that with Excel. So I've said some mean things about Tableau in my career that I probably won't stop, but my agency loves it. But I would point out that Tableau is an extra piece of software they have to buy for you. So if you see something really cool in Tableau, figure out how to do it in Excel for free, right? Because they've already bought you Excel. So that's another plug for Excel. Greg mentioned about bringing some skills, that might be sort of tangential. That's like even a strong word, right? That you wouldn't think were core to an agency's mission, but that they can make use of. And when we interview new hires, right, one of the things that we want to see is basically, are you going to be able to help us get our job done? And are you not going to make more work for us? So the first one is, do you have some skills that we can make use of, or can you learn them by yourself? Do you have a demonstrated ability to sort of autodidactically learn? Now, you're all in sort of the library and information science area, so that's sort of very core to what you do, is help people do that. So I think that would reflect very well on you. And then the other piece, though, is being able to demonstrate that you can sort of not just you can upskill yourself, but also that you can manage yourself, right? Manage projects from start to end. So having experience with projects, which might be part of a class in grad school or might be part of a research or an internship, but being able to show a portfolio of work that you've done a large portion of along, in timeline or start to finish, I think is really valuable, because we can look at it and then we can also ask you questions about it, right? And that's something really nice to have, something that sort of frames an interview, is to talk about what you've already done. And it makes you seem more like an experienced candidate as opposed to a new grad, right? Because an experienced candidate, we're going to talk about what they've done at their other jobs.
I know one of the most frustrating things about looking for a job straight out of grad school is the long list of required experience that they place on entry-level jobs. It is endlessly frustrating, but what I say to folks that I help look for jobs after they cycle out of the library is that you try for them, right? Sometimes the hiring official doesn't know what they're looking for, right? Oftentimes they, especially if it's a new position entirely, or if they're backfilling a position, they're looking for something that they don't know what they're looking for oftentimes. And so you bringing your skills, even if you haven't worked in a library before, bringing those skills, just like Greg and Michael and Rosalind were saying, put it on your resume, something that maybe you think it's a little bit outlandish, but it could sort of strike a chord with that hiring official. So we can talk more about that. I think we have an aligned question on that.
Absolutely. We always have aligned questions. And I was just going to say, as a career service professional, the skills that we just talked about and using them to get into jobs that you may not have experience in that industry, that's what we call transferable skill sets. So these skills that you gain in other industries, look and see how they translate into library and information career environments. So like Michael said, like Rosalind said, if you know Excel, if you know pivot tables and power queries, you can easily translate that into a career in the information industry, especially. In library science, if you've got the customer relationship management or the customer service, if you know how to provide an excellent customer experience, that is something that can be translated into librarianship. And so you want to look for, even if you don't have that direct experience, you want to look for those transferable skill sets that you can carry with you. And then you want to speak to them. You want to tie parallels between what you've done elsewhere and what that job is asking for. Okay. Okay. So, let's see. We have another question that was asked by Sanobar Chengani, I believe. I hope I'm not butchering you all's names. I apologize if I am. And this question is there a class or course that you found particularly helpful for your current position when you were in school, both grad and or undergrad?
Well, my grad school experience was long ago in a different century, the 1990s. So it's been a while, but I'll tell you that my advanced reference class that I took was the first semester that the University of Maryland had computers with web browsers in its computer labs. And that was a great time to be doing that and seeing all the ways that you could, we could do reference both using print sources and like pay databases and things, but also the free sources that were becoming available on the internet, just on the World Wide Web. And, you know, just being aware that I think that there's more than one option, you know, like there's the free stuff that's out there for everybody. And then there are the things that you have to, you know, have access to get to, and you can't find everything in Google. Google didn't exist back then, of course.
That's true.
So if you've taken that 501 class, right, or any, you know, like that class that gives you the really big group project, that you sort of carry all semester long, and then you're like, glad I never have to do that again. That was the most useful thing. I supervise 16 libraries now and initiatives across my system, and the skills I learned in doing that, right, was essentially I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't get that experience starting there. So you know, I know those classes can be hard to get through, but they are incredibly valuable.
Yeah, so I you know, look, I'm not trained as a librarian, right? You know, I'm trained as a statistician, and in grad school, I took a formal class in statistical consulting. Now, I'm not encouraging everyone here to go out and take a class in statistical consulting, but I'm going to tell you some things that I did in that class, and you should find classes or other experiences that give you this experience. Number one, working with people outside your field, right? You're librarians, you're going to do that a lot, right? So one of the things that I place a premium on when we're looking at new hires is their communication skills and ability to communicate difficult concepts in simple language. Okay, so like my boss is an economist, his boss is a policy analyst, like you know, like we're not all statisticians, right? And the other thing is that a class in statistical consulting makes you do things like write technical documentation. Writing technical documentation is a massively underrated skill that nobody has. And it's a thankless job, but I mean, basically this whole project that I'm talking about, where I'm talking about knowledge management, is due to lack of appropriate technical documentation. And so that's both things like documenting your work, but it's also things like writing coherent technical reports or analyses. If someone asks you to do some research, right, being able to write a coherent research report. And that is something that is really, I think, underappreciated.
Basically, the panel covered the answers that I had. Absolutely, the group projects are the number one thing that I took away, and definitely in use from here on out. And like Rosalind, you know, library school was a long time ago. Probably the classes I took aren't as relevant anymore, but and I don't remember their titles, so I'll leave it at that.
That is fine.
I can just say that one of the things that I took into the library and then out of it to other kinds of jobs was documenting SOPs, standard operating procedures, being able to write down not just stuff that I know how to do, but to elicit that information from other people and write it down in a way that makes sense to them and to the people they're trying to train. I went to a job after this where that was a big part of, after my first stint at NTL, where that was a big part of my job, and where a lot of people didn't see why it was necessary. Someone new comes in, well, we'll just train them. You know, you'll just have them sit with us, we'll show them how to do it. And I'm just like, really? That's how you want to do it? You know? And I mean, I had an experience where somebody in our library died suddenly in an accident, and you know, we couldn't go back and debrief them afterwards to find out how they were doing things that only they knew how to do. So
yeah, training a new hire is something that sounds like it's a lot of fun the first time. Oh, you got your own intern that's around you. The third and fourth time, you're like, this needed to all have been written down the first time. Why didn't I do that?
Yeah. I think Rosalind's really just, so thank you for pointing that out, because like meat format, right? Like anything that's stored in like a person or a brain is the worst format to store things in. And librarians are really notorious for being information professionals for storing things in meat format, right? We need to store them in durable documents, and having the skill to put that together will really carry you very far in your career.
and update them frequently.
And I'll add on to that. Contrary to popular belief, keeping your job or you know, sort of maintaining your value in a team by keeping everything in your head is not a value anymore. Everyone will agree that now everything is documented.
If you do that, it just means you can't be promoted.
Excellent. Awesome. So we only have about 8 minutes left. And so I am, there was another question briefly, if you guys want to answer this, about what are the chances of being able to work from home as a government librarian, or at least hybrid. And then I also wanted to have you guys answer one more question. So if we can answer that one quickly.
A lot of it depends on the individual job. If you have to staff a physical library, then, you know, I know librarians in other, like in, you know, state governments and so on, who like one person will come in each day, you know, and then they'll be the on-site person for that day. With the NCL, there's no in-person library. There's no physical library. It's all digital. And so there was really no reason for them to make us come back. So in fact, for a lot of us, our last regular day in the office was March 13, 2020. And I go in now and then when there's a reason to, like I would come in once a week this summer when we had an intern, but it, you know, there was no good reason for them to force us to come back to the library. So, and since everybody had proved that they could do it over the pandemic, they let us go on doing it. So it's going to depend on your library.
And I'll take the 180-degree tack from Rosalind. The Library of Congress, for the most part, if you are a new librarian coming in, you're going to be working with the collections. We are very front-facing with the public and with Congress, who is our very premier patron of the library. And so, for the most part, you will be on site. Again, it's position dependent, but if you are in one of the traditional librarian tracks here at the library, you will be on site more often than you will be teleworking. So yeah.
Awesome. And then last question for the panel. What can a new hire do, or a potential hire do, to be prepared to enter a position with your organization?
I'd say for a lot of people, there's, at least in the DC area, there are temp agencies that staff and staffing agencies that provide, you know, that are looking to fill jobs. Maybe they're temporary jobs, maybe they're contract jobs, but temping and contracting is how I got the experience. They got me long-term permanent work, you know, whether it was contract or consulting, or in my current situation, federal employee. You may not be able to get that job your first time around, but after you've got the experience, you know, it may be different in different cities, but in the DC area, that's what I would recommend for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned before, have a portfolio of work that you can show at interviews. It doesn't have to be a huge portfolio, but have at least some sort of flagship work that you've done that you can talk about, right? Because it makes you stand out, right? When we're talking about candidates after a round of interviews, it's, oh yeah, the guy that did that project, let's talk about him, right? Even if I don't remember your name. And it demonstrates that you're able to do that. And I will make one last big thing. If you do end up getting a job in government and you want to do public service loan forgiveness with my agency, please do your employment certification forms every year. Don't delay, because the last thing you want to do is work for a public service agency thinking that you're getting 5 years of PSLF credits, and then it turns out that they're not certified. So do it early, please. It really breaks our heart when we hear about people that are in that situation.
Absolutely. There was one other question. I know we have about 4 minutes left. There's a question that came in the chat. There's two questions that came in the chat. One was, when should she start applying? She graduates with her MSLS in August. When should she start applying for a job? My personal opinion is start applying now. You don't have to wait. And I know that there was a concern about, getting past the bots, especially if she doesn't have her degree listed. But if she doesn't have her degree already, but in my opinion, as a resume writer, I would say list the degree that you're getting and the expected graduation date, and that will get past the bots. That would be considered acceptable. Can you guys confirm or deny that?
I think it varies widely by like where you're applying to, right? You know, there are some places where, you know, they want you to have degree in hand. There are some places that won't, you know, for my own search doing this, I would say Kelly's advice is really good. I'd also say if you are a degree holder right now, CPL is hiring right now and will be hiring entry-level positions again later on this year. So if you're interested in the public librarianship end of things, we're hiring literally at this moment. So to take a look at the City of Chicago bid website.
And
I'd
then,
say for federal positions in USA jobs, the issue there is that, you know, they'll have a closing date and then, you know, you'll be in the position within 2 months. So if you're applying months and months and for a job that closes, you know, this week, you're not going to have your degree by the time they expect to have you in it. For like a full-time, you know, like a regular permanent federal job. I did interview for temp agencies and staffing agencies before I finished my degree. And then I did get work with them, you know, as soon as I had it.
And my perspective on federal is a little different, right? Some agencies they close it out and they hire very quickly, and other ones may use that cert list for a long time, right? Or they'll reuse that cert list for other positions at the agency. So definitely, you know, go ahead and apply. One thing is the way you write a resume to submit to a federal job on USA Jobs is different than when you're applying in industry. You need to look at like what the job requirements are. Those are hard and fast requirements that the MSPB is going to enforce. So you need to address every single one of those requirements directly in your resume, right? So if the job says, you know, you have to have a degree and you have to have 6 classes that have significant whatever, you need to literally say, I have this degree. This degree included 6 classes that has significant amount of whatever, like literally like barf the job description back onto your resume that you do for the job. In terms of the bots, there's a lot of advice out there about how to deal with ATS systems. Go take some of that advice. ATS systems are great for HR people and they're horrible for everyone else. And that's just the world we live in. So learn to deal with ATS systems. It's where you are in your career right now.
I will say something, I will add something as a professional resume writer. ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. For those that are not aware of what that means. Most places use ATS system in some way, shape, or form. It is not designed like the fearmongers will say to kick you out of the system entirely. It is designed to scan for keywords and or skills that the job is looking for. So we train it to look for specific things. And if you match those things word for word, you go to the top of the pile.
Agreed.
This
is not the time to worry about plagiarism. Okay.
Yeah.
If they give certain examples, use that exact terminology. If that's
especially in federal
experience that you have. Yeah.
Especially in federal, use their language. Don't try to use your own paraphrase of it. Use their exact language. That is how to get to the top of the pile.
One other thing just to put in here that I think is useful is just know where the entry level is and know where the real entry level is, right? You know, all of us are, I think, at least partially unionized or fully unionized environments, right? Like getting into a union structure can be a challenge. So like sometimes it's more important that you get in, right? And maybe not the optimal situation. And then you'll get into that optimal situation when a later bid comes out, right? So like, it's very important to keep an eye out for where those inflection points in, like where you can really get in and pull yourself into the organization. With jobs as stable as ours, get in there and then worry about advancement once you're in.
Agreed. And I was going to mention, I put in the chat that an entry-level position for someone with their master's degree is going to be about the GS9 level. If you can't find a librarian position at the GS9 level, look at the GS8 level, library technician positions, and also look for a title. It's this very sort of very nebulous title called program specialist. Okay, and they place program specialists all over the library. It may not be a specific librarian position, but it will be almost para-librarian, right? You are working with the librarians. So be open to job titles, and also be open to where you might land as far as what kind of library that you land in.
Because as I don't know if we mentioned this yet, but there are jobs that are advertised in the federal government that are only open to federal employees, current federal employees.
Mhm.
So once you're in, that gives you an advantage. But as I said, also contracting jobs frequently require the same education and experience and so on as some of the federal jobs, and they're easier to get. And they give you good experience in an agency. So when another job comes up and they hear your name, they'll be like, oh yes, I remember that person was competent, you know?
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so very, very much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. We really appreciate you guys for coming and sharing your knowledge with us today. Is there a way that they can connect with you on LinkedIn, on any other platforms?
I'm on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is best.
I'm on LinkedIn.
All right. So if you guys would like to take their names really quickly, write them down and connect on LinkedIn. Remember, one of my favorite sayings is that your network is your net worth. You have 4 lovely panelists here in the industry that are open to connecting with you. So please connect, expand your net worth, your network and your net worth, and make sure you send a note when you connect and say, hey, I came to this panel, appreciated you, would love to connect, so they know who you are, okay? Greg and Michael are too hard to find. Too many people share your names.
I don't have that problem.
It says
I'll
federal,
do-
it says statistician on mine, so, and it has a picture of me.
I'll do some optimization so I can get get mine back up top. I promise, folks.
All right. All right. Well, thank you all very, very much for coming today. And please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Also, remember that we have three or four other panels and the official GLAM career fair, career jam, will be held on February 24th. It is a Friday. It is from 12 p.m. Central, I believe, to 4 p.m. Central. And the reason I'm confused is because I'm on Eastern time. It's from 1 to 5 Eastern time, so 12 to 4 Central time. So we hope to see you guys there. Take advantage of the resources and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I look forward to seeing you. Well, I don't know if I'll see you, but I'll be at the events on the 24th. So
Okay, awesome.
very excited.
Awesome.
So yeah, thanks for putting this together.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Have a
for
great
coming.
one.
You too. Bye.
Hi, I got the times. I got my times confused. I thought I'm Pacific Coast, and I logged in at 11, thinking it was starting at 11.
I'm sorry. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, I was my fault. Apparently I don't know time zones sometimes.